On an ordinary weeknight in Los Angeles, in a small comedy club whose name most people have long since forgotten, a tall man slipped in through the back door and stopped just inside the shadows. He did not ask for a table. He did not want to be recognized. He wanted the one corner where the light from the stage barely reached, the place where a man can watch without being watched. On stage, under a single warm spotlight, Katt Williams was already deep into his set. Microphone in one hand, quick on his feet, pacing the boards and reading the crowd like a man who had memorized this room years before. He had no idea who had just come in. Nobody told him. The staff by the door had been asked, quietly, to keep it that way. And they did. There was a code in rooms like this one. You did not point. You did not run to the stage. You let the moment be what it was going to be. And so, for the next several minutes, one of the most respected comedians in the country stood in the dark and watched another man do the one thing they both understood better than almost anyone alive. He did not check his phone. He did not lean over to whisper to anyone. He just watched, still as a photograph, the way a man watches something he has traveled across a city to see. The man in the shadows was Dave Chappelle. Most people who repeat this story remember it as a simple visit, one famous comic dropping in to see another. But that is not what it was, and the part almost everyone leaves out is the part that changes everything that came after. Katt Williams did not walk into that club as a superstar that night. He was in the middle of the climb, the stretch of a career where a man is good enough to be respected, but still hungry enough to prove it every single time the light hits him. He had a reputation among other comics as one of the fastest minds in the business, a performer who could take a heckle, a stray sound, a spilled drink, and fold it into the act as if he had written it that afternoon. But reputation among comics is a private thing. It does not always reach the public. And so, on nights like this one, in rooms like this one, Katt Williams was still building it, brick by brick, laugh by laugh. That evening, he was locked in. Every observer who was there later agreed on that. He was working without a net, following the room instead of a script, letting the set breathe, and then snapping it shut at exactly the right second. He looked, one person remembered, like a man who had nowhere else in the world he would rather be. And here is the detail that the usual version of this story leaves out. Katt Williams was not having his easiest night. Early in the set, a pocket of the crowd had gone cold, the kind of silence that can rattle a lesser comic and end a set before it begins. What he did about that silence is the reason Dave Chappelle stayed. To understand that night, you have to understand the room itself. In the mid-2000s, Los Angeles was full of these places, low-ceilinged clubs tucked between storefronts, rooms that seated maybe 150 people if the fire marshal was in a good mood. The stage was barely a step up from the floor. The brick behind it had heard 1,000 comics, some who went on to fill arenas, most who never made it past that back wall. This was not television. There were no cue cards, no second takes, no editing to save a joke that died. What happened in a room like this happened once, in real time, in front of people close enough to see the sweat on a comedian's forehead. That was the whole point. A room like this was where a comic found out what he was really made of. The crowd that night was a working crowd, Ordinary people who had paid a small cover and a 2-drink minimum to laugh for a couple of hours. They did not know they were about to become part of a story that would be told for years. They only knew that the man on stage was very, very good, and that the hour was passing faster than they had expected it to. Some of them would remember this night for the rest of their lives, though at that moment they had no reason to think it was anything more than a good show on a quiet weeknight. What they did not know was that the best judge in the building was not sitting among them at all. He was standing behind them, in the dark, and he had come for a reason none of them could have guessed. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but in a live room, a few seconds is a very long time. A joke had landed flat. A table near the front had gone quiet, arms crossed, unimpressed. In that moment, a comedian has a choice, and the choice reveals him completely. He can rush, pile on more jokes, talk faster, chase the laugh he already lost. Or he can do the harder thing. He can stop. Katt Williams stopped. He let the silence sit. He looked at the cold table, unhurried, almost amused. And he did not fill the quiet with panic. He filled it with patience. The whole room felt the shift. The people who had been laughing sensed that something was happening, that the comic had noticed the exact thing they had noticed, and that instead of running from it, he was walking straight toward it. Then, calmly, without a trace of fear, he said one thing about that silence, one observation so precise and so honest that the cold table broke first. The laugh that followed was not the easy laugh from the top of the set. It was bigger, and it was earned, and it rolled through the room like something breaking loose. In the back, in the dark, Dave Chappelle finally uncrossed his arms, because he had just watched a man do the single most difficult thing in stand-up comedy. And what happened in the next 10 minutes is the part almost no account of this night gets right. So why did it matter who was standing in the back? Because the man in the shadows was not just any comedian. By that point, Dave Chappelle had become something rare in American comedy, a performer other performers studied. He was known for walking away from noise to protect the work, for caring more about the truth of a joke than the size of the check. When Dave Chappelle watched you, it was not idle. He was listening the way a musician listens to another musician, hearing the timing under the words, the choices most of the room would never notice. That is what makes this night worth remembering. It was not a fan in the crowd. It was a peer, one of the very few people alive who could fully understand exactly how hard the thing on stage actually was. And Chappelle had not come to be entertained. People close to him said he had been hearing the same name for months, from club owners, from other comics, from the road. Katt Williams. You have to see him in a small room. Television does not capture it. So he came, quietly, on a night he was not performing, to see for himself whether the talk was true. He did not bring a crew. He did not call ahead to the owner for a good seat. He came the way a working comic comes when he wants the honest version of a thing, alone, unannounced, willing to stand in the back with the sound guys and the late arrivals. For several minutes he simply watched, giving away nothing. And then came the cold patch in the crowd, the silence that could have ended it. Chappelle leaned forward slightly in the dark, He wanted to see what this man would do when the room stopped laughing. For a moment, Katt Williams said nothing. The man who could find words for anything, who had just talked a cold room back to life, simply stopped and looked at the figure standing near the front. The crowd, sensing it too now, went quiet in a different way than before. Not the cold silence of a joke that missed, but the warm, held-breath silence of people who realize they are watching something that will not happen twice. What passed between the two men lasted only seconds, and no camera recorded it. There was no grand speech. Katt Williams gave a small nod, the private nod one craftsman gives another, and Dave Chappelle returned it. And then, according to the people who were there, Chappelle did something that told the whole room exactly what he thought. He began to applaud. Not politely, fully. Standing there in the light he had spent the whole night avoiding, one of the most respected comedians in America applauded a man in the middle of his own set, in front of a crowd that now understood it was in the presence of two masters at once. The room came apart. The applause was no longer for a joke. It was for the craft itself, for the years of unseen work that both men had poured into rooms exactly like this one. And Katt Williams, who had walked in that night still building his name, stood in a light that had just changed forever. What happened next came down to a decision Dave Chappelle made in a single breath. He could have done what most people in his position do. He could have stayed in the shadows, watched the rest of the set, and slipped back out the door he came in, keeping his visit a private thing, a quiet confirmation that the talk was true. That would have been the safe choice. That would have been the ordinary ending. But that is not what he did. As the set built toward its close, as Katt Williams rode the momentum of a room he now completely owned, Chappelle began to move. Slowly, without drawing attention, he stepped out of the corner and started toward the front of the room. A few people near the back recognized him as he passed, and you could see the recognition move through the crowd like a current, a turn of heads, a ripple of whispers, the sudden electric awareness that there were now two of them in the room. Someone half rose from a chair and then thought better of it. A woman near the aisle put her hand over her mouth. The whisper of a single name began to travel from table to table, quiet at first, then unmistakable. Katt Williams, still on stage, felt the room change beneath his feet before he understood why. It is a strange thing that happens to a performer in that instant. The laughter does not stop, exactly, but its shape shifts. And a comedian who has spent years learning to read a room knows in his body that something new has walked into it. A comedian knows the exact temperature of his crowd, and this crowd had just changed temperature for a reason he could not yet see. Then he looked out past the lights, into the faces near the front, and he saw who was standing there. They did not make a spectacle of it afterward. There was no photograph taken, no announcement, no clip to pass around. When the set ended, the two men spoke briefly in a back hallway, out of everyone's sight, and then Dave Chappelle left the same quiet way he had come, through the door in the back, into the Los Angeles night. Most of the crowd went home that night and told the people in their lives that they had seen Katt Williams tear the roof off a small room. Only some of them fully understood what the second half of the night had really been. Because what happened there was not about fame. Two men who had spent their lives learning the hardest craft in entertainment had recognized each other, without cameras, without a stage built for it, in the one setting where nobody can fake it. The people who study comedy will tell you that this is the highest praise there is. Not an award, not a review, but the quiet respect of someone who knows exactly how difficult the work is, and who chose to stand up in the light and say so. Katt Williams went on to fill the biggest rooms in the country. Dave Chappelle became a legend all his own. But on one forgotten weeknight, in a club whose name is gone, they shared a room, a silence, and a single burst of applause that neither of them ever needed to explain. And that, in the end, is the part almost nobody remembers. But it is the part that mattered most.